September 1987, Madison Square Garden, New York City. 20,000 fans packed into one of America's most legendary venues for Michael Jackson's Bad World Tour. The energy was absolutely electric, the crowd was euphoric, and Michael was delivering what many would call the performance of his lifetime. But then during Smooth Criminal, something happened that no one in that arena could have predicted. A drunk man in the front row started screaming vicious obscenities at Michael, hurling personal insults that cut straight to his soul. Security immediately moved to remove the troublemaker, but Michael did something that shocked every single person in Madison Square Garden. He stopped the music, walked directly to the edge of the stage, and did something so unexpected, so powerful, that 20,000 people fell into complete silence. What happened next redefined what it means to face hatred with grace and turned a moment of pure ugliness into something beautiful that would change lives forever. To understand the magnitude of what happened that night at Madison Square Garden, you need to understand the immense pressure Michael Jackson was carrying in September 1987. The Bad World Tour was the most ambitious concert series ever attempted by any artist in history, and Michael was at the absolute peak of his global fame. But he was also drowning under the weight of unprecedented media scrutiny and public criticism that followed his every move. The American tabloids had been particularly brutal to Michael during his New York residency, with headlines that questioned everything from his changing appearance to the most intimate details of his personal life. The constant barrage of negative coverage was taking a devastating psychological toll on someone who had been performing since childhood and had never learned how to separate his public persona from his private self. Michael's close friend and longtime choreographer, Carlos Rivera, later revealed that Michael had been suffering from severe anxiety attacks before each show during the New York leg of the tour. He would spend hours locked in his dressing room, just sitting in complete silence, Rivera recalled years later. The criticism was absolutely destroying him from the inside. Michael was such a perfectionist that every single negative comment felt like a personal failure, like proof that he wasn't worthy of the love his fans showed him. He would read every review, every tabloid article, every cruel comment, and internalize all of it as if it were absolute truth about who he was as a person. The night of September 15th was particularly challenging for Michael's emotional state. Earlier that day, a major New York newspaper had published a devastating article questioning Michael's authenticity as an artist, calling him nothing more than a manufactured product with no real talent or soul. Michael's team had desperately tried to keep the article away from him, but word traveled fast in the entertainment world, and by afternoon, Michael had not only read it, but had memorized every cruel word. When Michael arrived at Madison Square Garden that evening, his usual pre-show ritual was completely disrupted. Instead of his typical hour of meditation and vocal warm-ups, he spent 30 minutes reading fan letters, something he only did when he needed to remember why he performed in the first place. His personal assistant, Maria Santos, found him holding a letter from a teenage girl who had written, "Your music literally saved my life when I wanted to give up on everything. You are my hero." That's when I knew tonight was going to be emotionally intense, Santos later revealed. Michael always carried the enormous weight of knowing how much his music meant to people around the world. But when he was hurting personally, that weight felt like it might crush him completely. He felt responsible for being perfect for everyone who loved him, even when he was falling apart inside. The concert began absolutely flawlessly, exceeding even Michael's impossibly high standards. His opening with "Wanna Be Startin' Something" had the entire crowd on their feet within seconds, and his energy seemed to feed directly off their overwhelming enthusiasm. Song after song, he delivered his usual perfection that had made him legendary. Every dance move was precise and fluid. Every vocal note was crystal clear and emotionally resonant. But as the show progressed through his incredible catalog of hits, Michael's band members and crew noticed something different about his demeanor that night. He seemed more intense than usual, more focused on scanning individual faces in the crowd, as if he was searching desperately for validation and acceptance in each person's reaction to his performance. The trouble started during Smooth Criminal, one of Michael's most technically challenging and emotionally charged songs. As he began the iconic opening sequence and started into his legendary anti-gravity lean that defied physics, a serious commotion erupted in the front section of the arena. A heavily intoxicated man in his 30s had somehow managed to get past multiple layers of security and was now standing on his seat, screaming at the top of his lungs directly at Michael. At first, the surrounding concert-goers tried to quiet him down, assuming he was just an overly enthusiastic fan who had gotten carried away by the excitement of seeing his idol perform live. But as his shouts became clearer and more distinct, it became horrifyingly obvious to everyone around him that this wasn't celebration or excitement. This was pure, unadulterated hostility and hatred. "You're a freak!" the man screamed, his voice somehow cutting through the powerful sound system and reaching Michael's ears. "You're not even human. You're a joke." The insults became increasingly personal and cruel, attacking Michael's appearance, his family, his authenticity as an artist, and even his masculinity. Other concert-goers in the section gasped audibly as his verbal assault became more vicious and unrelenting. Security immediately began moving toward the heckler with urgency, but the psychological damage was already spreading through the crowd like a toxic wave. The section around the drunk man had gone completely quiet, and the negativity was rippling outward through the arena as people became aware that something terrible was happening. Michael, despite being one of the most seasoned performers in the world, was visibly affected by the attack. His usually fluid and graceful dance moves became slightly hesitant and uncertain, and those close enough to the stage could clearly see the hurt and confusion in his eyes. This was Michael's absolute worst nightmare come to life in front of 20,000 people. Public humiliation and personal attack during what should have been a moment of joy and connection, broadcast live and recorded for millions more around the world to see. Every cruel tabloid headline he'd endured, every hateful comment that had been whispered behind his back, every doubt about his worth as a human being was now being screamed at him by someone who had paid to see him perform. What happened next would become one of the most powerful and transformative moments in live performance history, a moment that would be talked about and analyzed for decades to come. As the drunk heckler's insults grew louder and more vicious, echoing through Madison Square Garden's acoustics, something unprecedented occurred. Michael Jackson stopped dancing mid-move. He stopped singing mid-note. He stood completely motionless in the center of the stage as Smooth Criminal continued to play through the massive sound system, creating an eerie disconnect between the music and the performer. 20,000 people held their collective breath as Michael slowly and deliberately walked to the front of the stage, moving directly toward the section where the heckler was continuing his verbal assault. The man, emboldened by Michael's attention and mistaking it for weakness, continued his tirade with even more venom. "You think you're so special? You're nothing but a weirdo in makeup pretending to be something you're not." Security was literally within arm's reach of the heckler, ready to physically remove him from the venue and likely arrest him for disturbing the peace. But Michael did something that shocked everyone in the arena, including his own band, crew, and management team who were watching from the wings. He raised his hand clearly and decisively, signaling for security to stop and back away. Then he made a gesture that no one in that arena could have predicted or prepared for. He asked for the music to be turned off completely. Madison Square Garden fell into the kind of complete silence that 20,000 people rarely create, a silence so profound that you could hear individual voices from the upper levels. Michael stood at the very edge of the stage, looking down directly at the man who had been hurling the most vicious abuse at him for the past several minutes. The tension in the arena was absolutely unbearable. No one knew what was about to happen, and the uncertainty was palpable. Michael's tour manager, speaking frantically through his earpiece, urged him to continue the show and ignore the disruption. "Michael, just keep going. Security will handle this situation. Don't let him win." But Michael had completely different plans. He reached for his microphone and spoke in a voice so calm, clear, and gentle that it carried to every corner of the massive arena. "Sir, what's your name?" The heckler, caught completely off guard by the direct question and Michael's unexpectedly gentle tone, stumbled over his words. "What? What the hell does it matter what my name is?" "It matters to me," Michael replied with genuine sincerity. "You're here at my show tonight, and I'd like to know your name. I'd like to know who you are." The man, clearly intoxicated and confused by Michael's compassionate approach when he had been expecting anger or retaliation, mumbled something completely inaudible. Michael tried again with infinite patience. "I can't hear you clearly. Could you tell me your name?" "Tony!" the man finally shouted back, his earlier aggression now mixed with uncertainty and confusion. "My name is Tony Rodriguez." What Michael said next left everyone in Madison Square Garden completely speechless and would be remembered as one of the most profound moments in concert history. "Tony, thank you for coming to my show tonight," Michael said with genuine warmth. "I can see that you're upset about something, and I'm truly sorry that you're in pain right now." The crowd began to murmur in complete disbelief. Here was Michael Jackson being publicly humiliated and verbally attacked by a drunk heckler, and he was thanking the man and showing him compassion instead of anger or retaliation. But Michael wasn't finished with his response. "Tony, I don't know what's happening in your life right now that's making you feel so angry and hurt, but I want you to know something important. You matter. Your life has real value. And if my music, or even just this moment right here between us, can somehow help you feel less alone in whatever you're going through, then this entire concert was worth it." Tony Rodriguez stood frozen in place, his mouth hanging open as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. The anger and hatred that had been contorting his face began to dissolve slowly, replaced by something that looked like confusion, shame, and the beginning of recognition of his own pain. Michael continued with even more gentleness. "I've been where you are, Tony. I felt angry at the world. I felt misunderstood and judged. I felt like everyone was against me and nothing I did was ever good enough. But you know what I learned through all of that pain? Hurt people, and healed people heal people. So instead of me being hurt by your words tonight, I'm going to choose to see the pain behind them and try to help you heal." By this point, many people throughout the arena were openly crying. This wasn't what anyone had expected from a pop concert. This was raw, authentic human emotion being displayed on one of the world's biggest stages. Tony Rodriguez began to cry, his legs giving out as he slumped back into his seat, covering his face with his hands as the reality of his behavior hit him. The people around him, who had been angry and annoyed just minutes before now, looked at him with sympathy and understanding rather than judgment. Michael's voice became even softer and more compassionate. "Tony, I'm going to dedicate the rest of this song to you. Not because of what you said to me, but because I believe you're a good person who's having a terrible night. And we've all been there. We've all had moments where our pain made us act in ways we're not proud of." What happened next at Madison Square Garden was unlike anything anyone had ever witnessed at a concert before. As Michael began to perform Smooth Criminal again, this time dedicated specifically to Tony Rodriguez, something magical and transformative occurred throughout the entire venue. The crowd, who had been tense and uncomfortable during the confrontation, began to relax and understand that they were witnessing something truly profound happening before their eyes. Michael's performance of Smooth Criminal that night was different from any other version he had ever done. Every movement, every note, every gesture was infused with intention, emotion, and healing energy. He performed the entire first verse while maintaining direct eye contact with Tony, who was still crying in his seat. Tony watched in complete amazement as the person he had attacked with such venom was now performing exclusively for him with love and compassion. The transformation was visible not just in Tony, but in everyone around him throughout that section of the arena. The people in his area who had been angry and wanting him removed now had their arms around him, offering comfort and support. "I've never seen anything like it in my entire life," said Jennifer Chen, who was sitting just 4 rows behind Tony that night. "This man had been so horrible and cruel, and suddenly we all felt this overwhelming compassion for him." Michael somehow transformed a moment of pure ugliness into something beautiful and healing. But the most incredible part of the evening was still to come. As Michael finished the song, he did something that even his own band members and longtime crew didn't expect. He walked off the stage and directly into the crowd, heading straight toward Tony Rodriguez. Security immediately surrounded Michael as he made his way through the front section, but he was absolutely determined to reach the man who had attacked him. When Michael reached Tony, he knelt down in front of the man's seat and spoke to him quietly, sharing words that only Tony and a few people nearby could hear clearly. David Martinez, who was sitting directly next to Tony, later revealed what Michael said in that private moment. He told Tony that he forgave him completely and that he hoped Tony could find a way to forgive himself. Then he asked if there was anything he could do to help him with whatever was causing him so much pain. It turned out that Tony Rodriguez was going through a devastating divorce and had lost custody of his two young children that very morning. He had come to the concert drunk and angry, looking for someone to blame for his pain and disappointment. Michael listened to Tony's story with genuine compassion and understanding, never once mentioning the cruel things Tony had screamed at him just minutes before. Michael then did something extraordinary that no one could have predicted. He took off his iconic sequined glove, the same glove that had become his trademark and was worth thousands of dollars, and placed it gently in Tony's trembling hands. "This is for your children," Michael said softly. "When you see them again, and you will see them again, tell them that Michael Jackson believes their father is a good man who just had a really bad day." By this point, the entire arena was watching this intimate interaction on the massive screens, and there wasn't a dry eye anywhere in Madison Square Garden. The cameras captured Tony breaking down completely, not from anger this time, but from overwhelming gratitude, shame, and recognition of the grace he was being shown. Michael hugged Tony tightly, and the crowd erupted in the most thunderous, emotional applause in the venue's long history. But they weren't just cheering for Michael's performance. They were cheering for both men, for the power of forgiveness, for the possibility of redemption, and for the reminder that everyone deserves compassion even in their worst moments. As Michael returned to the stage, he made one final announcement that would be remembered forever. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight Tony taught us all something incredibly important. He showed us that everyone is fighting a battle we know nothing about. And sometimes the people who seem the angriest are actually the people who need love the most." The rest of the concert was electric with a completely different kind of energy than before. It was the energy of hope, healing, and human connection that transcended entertainment. The story of what happened between Michael Jackson and Tony Rodriguez that night didn't end when the final song was performed. In fact, it was just the beginning of a transformation that would prove the lasting power of choosing compassion over conflict. Tony Rodriguez, a construction worker from Queens who had been struggling with alcoholism since his divorce proceedings began, woke up the next morning with more than just a hangover. He woke up with Michael Jackson's sequined glove and a memory that would change the entire trajectory of his life. "I couldn't believe it had really happened at first," Tony later told local news in a 1988 interview. "I thought maybe I had dreamed the whole thing, but there was the glove, and people kept calling me, telling me they had seen it on television. I felt so ashamed of how I had acted, but also so grateful for how Michael had responded to my pain." Tony's story spread quickly through New York media, but not in the sensationalized way tabloid stories usually develop. Instead of focusing on the drama of the heckling incident, the coverage centered entirely on Michael's response and its profound impact on one man's life. The New York Times headline read, "When pop stars become healers, the Michael Jackson moment." True to his word, Tony used the glove as a bridge to reconnect with his children during his limited visitation rights. When he was finally granted supervised visits, he brought the glove to show his kids. His 8-year-old daughter, Sophia, was amazed that her father had actually met Michael Jackson, but more importantly, she was proud of how he was working to change his life and behavior. "Daddy became completely different after that night," Sophia Rodriguez said years later as an adult. "He stopped drinking entirely, started going to AA meetings religiously, and kept talking about how Michael Jackson had taught him that it's never too late to become a better person. That glove sat on our kitchen table as a reminder every single day." The impact of that night extended far beyond Tony's family and personal transformation. Michael's response became a case study in conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, and leadership under pressure. Universities began incorporating video footage of the incident into psychology, communication, and even business courses. Dr. Patricia Williamson from Columbia University wrote, "Michael Jackson demonstrated in real time how radical empathy and unconditional positive regard can transform even the most hostile situation into a moment of healing and growth." Michael himself was profoundly affected by the experience and what it taught him about human nature and his own capacity for grace under pressure. His security team wanted to implement much stricter crowd control measures for future shows, but Michael absolutely refused their recommendations. If we build walls between me and the audience, we lose the entire point of what music is supposed to accomplish, he told his tour manager firmly. Instead, Michael began incorporating more moments of direct audience interaction into his performances, often pausing mid-song to acknowledge individuals in the crowd who seemed to be struggling emotionally or upset about something. His longtime backup vocalist, Angela Foster, noticed the change immediately and profoundly. Michael became much more present and connected with his audiences after that night in New York. He wasn't just performing for them anymore. He was truly connecting with them on a deeper, more spiritual level. The Tony Rodriguez incident also inspired Michael to expand his charitable work significantly. Within 6 months of that night, he had quietly established a fund to provide free counseling services specifically for men going through divorce and custody battles. He never publicized this charity or used it for positive publicity, keeping it completely private until after his death when the details were discovered. Tony Rodriguez continued his journey of recovery and personal transformation, eventually becoming a licensed addiction counselor himself, specializing in anger management and family reconciliation. He kept Michael's sequin glove in a frame in his office with a simple plaque that read, "Hurt people, hurt people. Healed people, heal people." MJ. In 1995, when Michael returned to New York for another tour, Tony was invited as a special guest. This time he came completely sober, accompanied by his children and filled with tears of gratitude rather than anger. Michael spotted him in the crowd during Heal the World and gave him a warm wave and smile of recognition. It was their final interaction, but the lesson had already rippled out into countless other lives. This incredible true story demonstrates that our greatest moments as human beings often come not from our successes and achievements, but from how we choose to handle our most difficult and challenging situations. Michael Jackson could have easily had that heckler removed and forgotten, but instead he chose to see the wounded human being behind the anger and changed a life forever. In our world that seems increasingly full of negativity, conflict, and division, we can all learn from Michael's example in that transformative moment. How can we choose compassion over judgment? How can we respond to hatred with love? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story inspired you to think differently about handling criticism or difficult people, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need this message of hope today.